Okay, so the workshop tonight. This is a topic that honestly I really didn't want to do. I was, when everybody started talking about it, I was just, it got to the point where I'm just like, all right, come on, enough. Let's pick something else to talk about in the media and everything else. And tonight, I think, on the other hand, though, you're going to learn something really good. You're going to learn something valuable that I wish everybody knew, because we would have a very different situation and a very different mindset and view on what's going on if we had it right. So you're going to learn something tonight, but it's not just going to be the game plan for the zombie apocalypse. That's of course the scoff here is I don't think there's going to be a zombie apocalypse. Okay, but you know what? Even if there is, you're gonna be able to rest a little bit easier knowing what to do and what the real agenda behind all this is, because it's pretty easy to see through. And just to give you a little bit of background, this is not the first that we've seen, right? This is not the first public hysteria hype about a massive infection, right? And everybody remembers the swine flu. Everybody remembers the bird flu. Okay, those are the recent ones. The swine flu, I remember. You can actually go on our YouTube page and you can look up the video on there of the swine flu workshop that I did at the very beginning of the hype. It was kind of like this, when it was like, everybody was starting to ramp up the chatter about it, that it was gonna get airborne and it was gonna infect all these people and everybody's gonna die and yada yada yada, and it was really going overboard. And so I did a workshop and laid out exactly what was going to happen and what the push was behind it, why they were doing it, everything else, and basically everything lined up exactly according to that. This isn't going to be any different. If you see how these plays are made and you see the reality behind the pictures, you can see what's really going on behind the hype and the hysteria. Okay, so we really have to go back through history, though, if we're going to see how all this stuff works. And of course, we're going to start off with the whole PINKtober thing, because it just kind of ties in together with all this, so you can see the big picture behind it. So what does research say about Breast Cancer Awareness Month? It was initiated in 1985 by the American Cancer Society and pharmaceutical giant AstraZeneca. Okay, so why do you think the American Cancer Society and a major pharmaceutical company would want to start a month dedicated to breast cancer awareness? It's pretty simple, to increase awareness of their product. You got to look at these things no different from Coca-Cola doing a big summertime blitz, or if you watch TV and you see the way that they do movie promotion. The next time the Avengers movie comes out, they're going to be promoting it heavy months in advance, right? To raise your awareness, because then what happens if they don't do any marketing beforehand? When the movie comes out, how many people go and see it? They're going to lag in the box office. So what they do, it's really brilliant. If you think about it, they hype it all up beforehand, so that everybody gets excited and wants to be the first ones in line to go and see it. Well, then that first weekend they do big things. And so what does all the papers and everything start saying? The big movie is The Avengers. It broke every record out there. It did this much in sales. You remember Frozen, okay? Mm-hmm. Frozen broke every record out there, and everybody was literally like this kind of hysteria over Frozen. Every kid in America was singing that song, including mine. They're still singing it, And so it's all about driving the hype to get people to follow and build that momentum behind your product. Well, it's really no different. The only thing is it's that the difference is Disney doesn't use fear-based marketing that I've ever seen. They've never sold a movie on the basis of fear, but that's exactly what the cancer promotions are. They do them all based around fear. And fear, of course, is the most powerful motivator to mankind. It motivates you to do things that you wouldn't normally do, right? So, and we go further into that. Susan Komen Foundation 2010 earnings was $400 million. Okay, so they got in $400 million in donations. Okay, just by doing the whole brand, and that's only one sector of the pink ribbon stuff. That's only one. Okay, but it's one of the big ones. A whopping 5% of that went to treatments, actual treatments of. And what are the treatments? Is it vitamin C therapy and natural methods? No, 5% of 400 million is going towards collective medicine-based treatments. It's going towards chemotherapy, radiation therapy, CT scans, stuff like that. 10% went to just sheer fundraising costs. So they spent $40 million in order to make $400 million. Okay, not a bad turnaround. That's a pretty good turnaround. 11%, more than the fundraising costs, went towards administrative and salaries. Okay, just paying people to work the campaigns. 13% went to screenings. That's different from the marketing, from the fundraising costs. That's just screenings, going out. Now you see where the money comes into play, because they can do the screenings on all these people and find the patients to treat. There's an old, you guys remember back in the day that, I don't know that they really do it anymore, but you remember back in the day, they used to always have somebody at the schools doing scoliosis scans, or scoliosis checks. And what do they have you do? Anybody remember? Bend over, right? Bend over and touch your toes. So they had everybody bend over and then touch their toes, and they're looking. That's called the Adams test. Okay. Well, we know in the research, and personally as a chiropractor, the Adams test is close to worthless. Okay. It will never find the curves that we see every day. Where there are 5-degree curves or 10-degree curves. The Adams test really only gets seen when you have a massive curve. In other words, a surgical curve. Okay? So why are they really doing the screenings in the schools? It's pretty simple. It's really a great marketing tactic. You can go into the school, you can scan 300 kids in an hour, and you can find that one kid that needs a $40,000 surgery. When the reality is, are they going to go after conservative treatments? Are they going to send them to a chiropractor? No way. No way. That's the orthopedics are in there because they can do a $40,000 surgery. So it makes the whole thing worth it. You got to look at how these motives go. So 13% goes to screenings, which of course is going to bring in millions of dollars to the financial backers, the pharmaceutical companies, the American Cancer Society. It drives the whole system. 20% goes to research. Are they researching, again, things like vitamin C therapy and natural methods? No. Are they researching better forms of thermography scanning, which is completely non-invasive as opposed to mammography? No. They're not looking at any of that. They're just wanting to find they're just wanting to do pharmaceutical research. So it's going back towards the companies that start the organizations and the systems in the first place. It all rolls back around. Then 39% goes to education and promotion, because of course the more you can educate the public with the information that you want, the further you can continue to perpetuate the system. Make sense? So the largest part goes towards what they call education and promotion. But go to their website and look up their form of education. Look up what they tell you to do, what their protocols are, how to check, and everything else, and what the recommended treatments are. You won't see anything on there conservative or natural at all. In fact, we'll get into some of that on the next slide, I believe. Mammography, for example, has a 40% false positive rate and is known to promote cancer. Now, why did mammography replace thermography? Because thermography was an acceptable method for scanning people. And they would say because it's not as well detecting. Okay? But the experts still say now today that you can detect breast cancer earlier on thermography than you can on mammography. The reason why is anybody that does cancer research knows that cancer causes neogenesis of arteries, of blood vessels. So it brings new blood vessels into the site in order to feed itself. So it grows these blood vessels, and essentially a good treatment is one that can stop some of this blood flow to the tumor and starve it, right? Because then the tumor can't continue to grow. One radical as in good new treatment that was developed here recently in Israel is they are actually going in, and with a needle and a scanning system, they can go in and guide the needle into the inside of the tumor specifically. Then they inject the tumor with liquid nitrogen. And what happens is the liquid nitrogen freezes all of the blood vessels inside, and it collapses on itself and it dies. You don't have to do anything else to the outside of the patient. You don't have to do no chemo, no radiation. You just directly inject the tumor, it collapses, and they're showing good results with it so far. So,
Maybe explain the difference in thermography and mammography.
So thermography is where they do. Good question. It's where they take a picture of you. Okay, so it's infrared camera, and it just takes a picture of you, and you can see the hot spots. So if you have genesis of new blood vessels to an area because they're feeding, let's say, a breast cancer spot, then you're going to have more blood flow to that area. So guess what it shows up on an infrared scan? A hot spot, right? So you're going to see that hot spot there. So you can take a full picture of somebody from the front, sides, whatever, and all it is a picture. And you can see problems early on when they're just starting to create new blood vessels. The tumor may be tiny. I mean, there may be a real small center of cells, but you can still see it early. Mammography is good at detecting size and position. Okay, so if you know you have a tumor, you can then do the mammogram to detect how big it is and exactly where the location is for, whatever treatment you want to do. Whether it might be the needle guided thing, if that ever makes it into America. So, but it does not detect early cancer. It actually has a 40% false positive rate. So, which systematically is kind of a good thing, right? Because if you show false positives 40% of the time, and you can get people to start taking chemotherapy on the basis of the finding, why not diagnose an extra 40%, right? So, there are these problems that are set up, yet that's the go-to system that all of these players are promoting. Okay, clearly it doesn't make sense though. And by the way, there is a thermography place in Mobile that you can get that done. So if anybody needs to know, chemo and radiation is where research dollars go, both of which are known also to promote cancer. So, like I said, the mammography, it's massive amounts of radiation. We've got the breakdown on a sheet up front, but it's multiples more radiation than you would ever get on just basic X-rays like we take here. Okay, so that radiation. I have patients that ask me about radiation just with regular X-rays because they know about the cancer risk. Okay, but you're doing that supposedly every year. You're getting those done on each breast. You see the problem there? Okay, and then chemo and radiation are, of course, the primary players of where the treatment is going to go once you get the diagnosis. Both of which we know. I mean, you've got ex-FDA commissioners that say the miracle is not that patients survive cancer; it's that they survive cancer and chemotherapy. Like, holy moly! I mean, you've got a problem when the majority of oncologists say off the record they would not have their family go through the same treatments that their patients go through. Fact. I mean, that's scary stuff. I don't even put a vitamin on the shelf until I've tested it on a number of people and seen does it actually work, before we want to start just handing it out. A lot of times I've taken it myself. Okay, so pink washing. This term pink washing is what has come to be known as the process that you see during PINKtober, okay, where everything is marketed pink. companies come out with pink everything. You know, they're selling pink toaster ovens, for goodness sakes. You know, and that's called pink washing, and they do it to sell products because people inherently feel good about investing in a, you know, if they've got a choice between a regular set of golf clubs and a pink set of golf clubs, they see, well, you know, a portion of my money is going towards breast cancer research, and that's a good thing. So, you know, in the name of women everywhere, I'm going to invest in the pink one, right? That's the thought process that goes through. That's what's behind pink washing. So the pink ribbon was first used in the fall of 1991 by the Susan G. Komen Foundation at a New York City race for cancer survivors. Okay, so they were doing a race for the survivors. They had the pink ribbons out there, and you know, it just caught on. Everybody loved it, and or the you know, that was kind of like the first indication of it. But then Estee Lauder and Self Magazine, they took that pink ribbon idea and they made it big. Okay, they started promoting it heavy. And they started labeling all of their products, cosmetics and stuff with it. What do we know about cosmetics?
It's toxic.
That they're sold to women and they're toxic. They cause cancer. You know, they routinely have components and ingredients in them that are known to cause cancer. So think about the oxymoron behind that one. Many businesses, like those, have been found to donate little or none of their revenue, in fact, to the Pink Ribbon campaign. So they're out there selling and promoting the pink stuff, but they never give $1 to the actual campaign. You guys remember the ALS bucket challenge?
Uh-huh.
What happened to that? You guys stop and think about that? Like, it was all over the place, right? A month ago,
Oh, yeah.
and all of a sudden, nobody's talking about it anymore. Go figure. You know, that tends to happen in the media. But the funny thing about it is, if you go back to the way that thing got set up, it was intended that you get challenged. You know, I challenge you to do the ice bucket challenge, and you know, to avoid having to dump a bucket of cold ice over your head, you would instead choose to donate to the campaign. Well, it completely backfired, and everybody started doing stupid things like dumping tractor loads of ice and, you know, killing their friend on their head. I mean, stuff like that. It became this like big thing, and you know, most people are not donating a dime to the actual foundation.
Right.
So
in the news, they had the largest donation they've ever had.
they did.
Because of the promotion of the
Yep.
foundation.
Yeah, they absolutely had the largest ever, but that just tells you that they had very small donations beforehand and there really wasn't any awareness. But what I'm saying is the overall meme that was created by it, if you look at it in percentage-wise, it was vastly unsuccessful. Like, it did the opposite of what they intended to get donations. It just made a bunch of people dump ice on their heads. So, anyhow, that's you know, part of what's going on behind here. They lock onto it and latch onto it to sell products, but they don't actually donate any money. Okay? The products displaying the ribbon often include ingredients that cause cancer. We talked about that. They, you know, all the time. I mean, there's products that they're known to cause cancer, but you know, they sell them anyways and sell it to promote the breast cancer research. Breast cancer has been transformed from a serious disease and individual tragedy to a market-driven industry of survivorship and corporate sales pitch. Pink Ribbons, Inc., Breast Cancer and the Politics of Philanthropy in 2006. So this was an ad from the Campaign for Safe Cosmetics. Shouldn't companies that claim to be fighting for a cure for breast cancer stop using chemicals that cause that very disease? That was, you know, so this here is kind of the same thing that you hear from ALS patients, you know, that talking about the ice bucket challenge. You know, you could see reports, you know, on blogs of people online that had it that were like, this thing is ridiculous. Like, what is it actually doing for me, the patient, you know, who has ALS? It's, you know, at the end of the day, it really doesn't do anything for them. Okay, so cure or promotion, that's really the thing in question. Controversial, expensive, and dangerous mammography is preferred over simple, effective, and completely non-invasive thermography, like we talked about. While money is poured into drug research, natural therapies, and prevention are completely and totally ignored. They don't, in fact, they're negated. They don't even want to talk about them. They won't put money into them, because what ultimately is research? Most research is done on the basis of what profits are to be gained. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, there has to be motive behind doing a lot of research, and that's not all the case. Some cases there are studies that are done that are actually used as investigational, and that's the way the research field started back in the 1940s and 50s. It was really on a good path. They were testing different treatments to see which ones really worked, and that's the whole purpose in research. But now research is cataloged and categorized in order to prove a point. And often that point starts, the question behind the research starts with, what do we want to prove, right? And when you start from that premise, things get messy, things get ugly. And while it happens all the time on the pharmaceutical side, you have one instance where a natural guy, you guys might have seen the stuff with Dr. Russell Blaylock, where he was pinned all over the media for falsifying research in regards to vaccines. And it was this, and he basically used, I don't even remember the details behind it, but they chastised him on one little calculation, the way that he came up with a number on something, yet they do those similar things all the time in other research and get away with it. For example, one that talks about on the video this week with the flu, Dr. Chestnut, he's a chiropractor that's real heavy into research. Brilliant guy, and he's in the video that we're playing this week talking about how the flu shot at first was based, that they still use a statistic that it reduces all case mortality by something like 50%. So in other words, it reduces your risk of dying in a car accident, dying from electrocution, murder, any of those other things. It reduces all that by 50%. And these numbers are still often passed around in the media today. It's a completely ridiculous idea, yet that's what they use to promote it. So, there's definitely a double standard when it comes to who's doing what. Let's see. What motive is there to cure cancer? Think about that. What motive is there to cure cancer? I'm not talking personal. I'm talking political, corporate. Is there really any motive to cure cancer? Who wins? The people do. But at the end of the day, industry suffers. Government suffers. Food industry suffers. Pharmaceutical suffers. All the ones that actually run things, they all suffer. But the people are the ones that win in that situation. So there's not really any political motive to be gained by eliminating cancer. That's why from the time that we promoted the war on cancer to today, what has happened? The rates of cancer have steadily increased, and we've got the highest rates of cancer that we ever have. Lost profits, fewer patients, inability to sustain a bloated, wasteful system have created a scenario where alternative cures must be eliminated. They have to be. They're dangerous to the very system. So, when something gets so bloated that if you change it, it collapses on itself, you go into protective mode. You just do anything you can to protect the system and keep it running forward. This came out this year, and this is one clear example of that. This was from CNN. Task Force opposes routine mammograms for women aged 40 to 49. Do you guys remember seeing that come out? So they came out with a study. Women in their 40s should not get routine mammograms for early detection of breast cancer, according to updated guidelines set forth by the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force. Before having a mammogram, women ages 40 to 49 should talk to their doctors about the risks and benefits of the test and then decide if they want to be screened according to the task force. So, right after they came out with that, what happened? All the oncologists out there and gynecologists freaked out. And we saw them. I remember sitting over at Red Bar eating breakfast, and there was a good-looking young female gynecologist talking to the reporters about very succinctly about how the guidelines are just ridiculous. That they're being irresponsible, and that the gains clearly outweigh the benefits of not doing it, and on and on and on, making it look good because they're fighting back. They don't want that information being promoted. So But, you know, this is the kind of stuff, you got to get used to seeing this. And you got to be able to look at the media, see the stories, and see and ask yourself, what's really going on behind the picture? Because when you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. That's what Mark Twain said. Smart guy. Okay. So these were shirts you guys might have seen us wearing these here. We made them a couple of years ago, and I still wear mine occasionally. Only time I ever wear pink. Think before you pink. Just a couple quotes on here. War on cancer is a failure. Despite $30 billion spent on research and treatment since 1970, cancer remains undefeated, with the death rate not lower but 6% higher in 1997 than in 1970. Okay, that was an MD in the New England Journal of Medicine. We have a multi-billion-dollar industry that is killing people right and left just for financial gain. Their idea of research is to see whether 2 doses of this poison is better than 3 doses of that poison. That was a MD oncologist. Here's another MD, Dr. Diamond, said finding a cure for cancer is absolutely contraindicated by the profits of the cancer industry's chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery cash trough. So in other words, it's not going to happen. Okay. Yet every dollar raised goes to Big Pharma and the cancer industry so they can find the cure, having us believe they don't have enough money yet to do so. When the American Cancer Society is the largest nonprofit, the wealthiest nonprofit organization on the planet. They've got so much in land holdings alone, it's ridiculous. I mean, if you looked at the real estate ownings of the American Cancer Society, it's a joke. I mean, they've got more money than Harvard. They've got more money than the Catholic Church. I mean, they've got more money than everybody. It's unreal. Okay, Ebola. So you know, to make the connection as we're going through this, because you know, with what we've covered so far with the pink stuff, you can kind of start to see what's happening now. But now I'm going to give the statistics behind it. So this is the history. The natural reservoir of Ebola virus is fruit bats, otherwise referred to as bushmeat. Okay, this right here is bushmeat. Okay, those are bats being cooked on an open grill like Burger King, right? All right. In Africa's Congo Basin, an estimated 5 million tons of bushmeat are eaten per year. 5 million tons. Okay, that's the Center of International Forestry Research. The first cases of human Ebola was in 1976, and since have averaged 83% death rates. Okay, that's no joke. I mean, that is a lot of deaths. Okay, or that's a very high death rate, should I say. It is characterized by raging fever, vomiting, diarrhea, and uncontrolled hemorrhaging. This uncontrolled bleeding may induce vitamin C and vitamin K deficiencies. Not ironically, these symptoms almost directly correlate with scurvy. Scurvy is a severe vitamin C deficiency. Okay, if you remember back in the day, the sailors were lost in the millions by scurvy. Millions. And it was over 100 years from the first time that they introduced the idea that citrus fruits and vitamin C was a cause of scurvy, the lack of, to when they actually initiated putting it on all the boats. 100 years passed before they actually put that theory into practice, should I say. Okay? So looking at that and understanding that now, unlike scurvy or even the flu, the seasonal flu, I mean, you look at how many thousands of people die every year from the basic, simple flu. Since the first outbreak in 1976, there have only been 4,494 deaths worldwide. That's straight from the CDC's own website. Now, that may look like a lot until you look at the number of people Americans only, that die every year from car accidents, that die every year from shark attacks, that die every year from medications. I mean, the American medical system kills over 1 million Americans every year, directly correlated to medical care, between pharmaceuticals and screwed up surgeries and inadequate treatments and everything else. There's a report on my website, Death by Medicine. You can look up the statistics. Over 1 million people every year. Yet this is, since 1976, there's only been less than 4,500 people. Okay? So the first thing I want you to do is look at that and say, well, how in the world are we talking global pandemic everywhere you turn when in over 30 years only 4,400 people have died from this thing? Where's the justification in the numbers to be talking global pandemic? I mean, you'd think if a global pandemic was going to happen by now, it would have happened in the last 40 years. Why all of a sudden now? Did the virus change? All of a sudden it's airborne. You see the theories about that now. It's airborne. The conspiracy theorists are going just as wild as the media is. That's the funny part. You're sitting back and you're seeing even the natural crowd is going crazy about this stuff. Okay? Current cases in the U.S. as of today, okay, 9 total cases in the United States. 9. Okay? I was raging about whooping cough when they were talking all the whooping cough stuff, and I was going through the statistics on that and how ridiculous it was. Yet there's only 9 cases of this. I mean, whooping cough beat that. Now whooping cough is looking like a bad thing, right? If you compare it to these numbers. There's been 1 death, okay? It's hard to go based on statistics when you've only got a population of 9. I mean, that's not a very big pool of... I mean, I can throw dice 9 times, and I'm not going to get a very good average, right? Okay? There's been 1 death. There's been 6 recovered. There's 1 in good condition, and there was 1 doctor that was diagnosed on the 23rd. So that was 4 days ago, so there's not really enough time. And, I saw a couple other reports. They're testing a couple other people, a 5-year-old boy. It's like... I mean, they're making a big deal about it every single case. So much that you guys remember here in Mobile, they started promoting on TV possible case of Ebola in Mobile, Alabama. Do you remember that? You guys hear about that on the news? The second it came out, I was furious because I said, you know what? I guarantee you they have not even tested this person yet. They haven't even tested him yet. And they're already talking about it on the media. Shame on them. Shame on them. I mean, that's insane. And sure enough, false alarm. False alarm. I mean, come on. I mean, it's completely irresponsible. So at this point, regardless, at this point, if you just look at the statistics, mind you, it's a population of 9, okay? But at this point, there is only 11.1% death rate in the United States, compared to an 83% death rate over there. So, what's the difference? What's going on? Why is there such a difference in the numbers? Besides a population of 9. I want to drill that into you. Okay? Why the difference?
Not eating fruit bats?
There's a good one. Not eating fruit bats. Let's look at the differences. Okay? Let's think about this a little more. So, victim assessment. Populations at centers of outbreak are impoverished and malnourished, living in non-sanitary living conditions, and given poor standard medical treatments. To the degree that they're being quarantined and just given whatever if you look at what's going on, there's people trying to break out of quarantine areas because they're being all held in hostage in these basically death camps, right? That's the way they're seeing it, is they're stuck in death camps, and so they're trying to get out. They're trying to break out before they get taken too. So if you look back through history, what other plagues affected people when they were impoverished, malnourished, and living in non-sanitary living conditions? Scurvy, Black Plague. How about this? All of them. Right? All of them. You look at smallpox, you look at polio, you look at every single thing that they've got vaccinations for. They all affected the low-income, impoverished, malnourished individuals living in non-sanitary conditions. I mean, the Black Plague was they say, because people were eating rats that were infected with the plague. Rats and bats. That's the idea tonight. Don't eat rats and bats. And you're probably good to go.
And don't throw your
Okay?
stick out the window.
Now, let's go into this further though. Let's evaluate. I mean, we could probably stop there to see the difference, right? You see the difference already. But let's look at a couple other points. Dark skin populations produce far less vitamin D compared to fair skin, leading to a further immune compromise. But when you're fair skinned, okay, you absorb more sunlight. Basically, when you have dark skin, you have a better, your body's better built to reflect the effects of the sun, if you will, because of the pigmentation in the skin. Okay, but we absorb vitamin D better. Our bodies create it better. So you've got to supplement because let's put it this way: the sun doesn't affect blacks as it does whites, and it depends on, I mean, Mexicans and everybody, depending on how the color is, you're going to absorb and create vitamin D differently. So that's a fact that we've got to look. Where do these always affect? The really, really dark-skinned populations in Africa. This is where the outbreaks are. Okay? Treatment usuals include acetaminophen, Tylenol, and antibiotics given to ease the symptoms and prevent secondary infections. Okay, that's why they're giving these things to it drives me nuts. It's the same stuff that we're doing here, right? Every day I hear about people given antibiotics for stuff that is clearly viral. Sinusitis and viral pneumonia and all constantly. I mean, every day it seems somebody knows. What does it hurt? Luckily it's probably only once a week with patients. It's a little bit better. But given antibiotics for things that are most likely viral, but in almost no cases do they ever actually test to get a culture to confirm that it's bacterial and that the antibiotic they choose to use is actually going to work against that bacteria. Right? So in other words, we're tanking the system with antibiotics with ill regard, with no regard for what it does. Okay? Up to 3,000 milligrams a day of Tylenol are given for fever, which of course you guys know is the body's natural defense mechanism. Okay, there's a great article if you go to my website. There's an article on there called Fever, Cold, and the Flu. Read that article because it goes through how Tylenol inactivates your immune system. It shuts it down completely. It causes, when you have a fever, you release calcium ions in your bloodstream, and when you lower that fever, it shuts that off. Well, the calcium ions are what create macrophage production and bring the white blood cells to life. It's what basically activates everything and gets it moving. So when you take Tylenol and you lower the fever, you shut off the body's natural response process. So you compromise a patient. Yet 3,000 milligrams a day are given because, we don't want them to have a fever. That's terrible. It further depletes glutathione. What is glutathione? You guys remember? It's an antioxidant. It's the most potent antioxidant that your body makes, and it has to be made in the body. Okay, you can't just take glutathione. It doesn't work that way. So that's the most potent antioxidant in the body. Very important for immune system function. And look at that. It shuts off vitamin C. Your body can't absorb and work with vitamin C properly when you take Tylenol. So that's required to maintain glutathione levels. So vitamin C is required to maintain glutathione, which further depletes glutathione. Okay? Now, depletion of vitamin C is now implicated in the scurvy-like hemorrhage. When you have vitamin C depletion, you start bleeding. Okay? And the more you give Tylenol, the more it perpetuates the symptom. The more it just further deepens the hole until the patient can't recover. Okay? Then the typical antibiotics that are given, according to, I believe this was according to Wikipedia, amoxicillin, Cipro, and Rocephin are the main ones right now. These are the antibiotics given that are known to deplete vitamin K. Okay, what do you guys know? Where do you get your vitamin K from? Most of you are getting it in vegetables, but where is it in the supplementation you guys are familiar with? Vitamin D, right. The vitamin D We make sure that it includes K1 and K2 because K1 and K2 help your body to distribute calcium where it needs to go. If you're depleted in vitamin K, you can't absorb calcium. Okay, and of course we just talked about the calcium ions having to do with the fever. All of that correlates and ties together. Okay, so it's known to deplete vitamin K, an important factor in blood clotting. So you're hemorrhaging because of vitamin C, and now you can't clot either, so you just perpetually just worsen and worsen and worsen, and it gets worse as the more treatment you get. So why antibiotics are given for Ebola anyways? What do we know Ebola is? It's a virus. So we shouldn't be given antibiotics at all, but of course I say it's for secondary infections. Anybody, silver? That might work for that. And it's cheaper than antibiotics. Why aren't they giving people silver? Why aren't they using silver dressings?
Some of them are trying to. They were shut down by the World Health Organization.
I believe that. There you go. Yeah.
They were trying to do the vitamin C, and they were trying to do silver, and they were bringing it in, and the World Health Organization was turning them away.
Bingo.
So doctors are trying, but they're getting their hands tied.
There you go. There you go.
Drugs.
There you go. So the form of the question should have been, why aren't the major organizations, the World Health Organization, doing that? It's because they don't want to stop it. It's too early to stop it. You want to see it continue to further. We'll get to that. When Ebola patients are misdiagnosed with malaria and given anti-malarials, Reamet and however you say the other one, and quinine, death rates are 67 to 100% respectively. Okay. Now can you see why now? Considering that Ebola has only killed less than 4,500 people in the last 30, 40 years, how many people die from malaria in Africa every year? Way more. Okay? So can you see why people would be given malarial drugs instead of treating it as Ebola? Because it's much more common. So, in most years, if you look at the statistics, only 1 or 2 or maybe 5 people die from Ebola in a whole year. If you look up the statistics by the year, you can actually see it all laid out on the CDC's website. Oftentimes, 1 person died. Okay, but if that 1 person had Ebola and they gave them anti-malarial drugs and it kills 100% respectively, can you now see why 83% of people are dying from Ebola while only 11% are dying over here? Again, based on 9. We got to throw that out. That 1 really skewed the statistics. Okay, and by the way, because I don't think we're going to hit that here, do you know that 1 patient was given a untested drug before he died? He was given an untested drug, a new medication on the market that the FDA approved to go ahead and give him. Interesting. So, anyhow, quinine is known to deplete vitamin K and cause synchronism. So, common symptoms include nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Those are eerily familiar. That sounds like what Ebola patients typically have, right? So you see all these things are just continuing to tie together. Okay, watch this video here real quick. This is about 10 minutes long, but I wanted to put this out on here because to show you, this is actually Barbara Lowe Fisher, who heads up the National Vaccine Injury Center or whatever. Basically, this is one of the leading organizations on the anti-vaccine end of, they're a big website. So she's more on the natural side of things. Okay, so kind of watch it with that pre-frame.
My name is Barbara Lowe Fisher. My son was injured by DPT vaccine in 1980, and this is a reference commentary brought to you by the nonprofit National Vaccine Information Center that can be read on nvic.org. In the digital age, infectious disease outbreaks like Ebola are brought into our lives through our smartphones, tablets, and laptops, and we can easily access and quickly analyze the information we receive. As Americans get smarter and more savvy about how to sort through the kind of fear-based rhetoric that sells newspapers, we are able to better assess exactly what is going on with Ebola in Africa and the U.S. and ask good questions about what we're seeing. Inquiring minds want to know the truth about why Ebola hemorrhagic fever has landed on American soil. Unfortunately, Congress and officials at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Departments of Defense and Homeland Security are having a hard time coming up with answers that do not raise more questions. Let's review the brief timeline of what is being billed as the worst Ebola outbreak ever that has prompted top U.S. public health officials to warn that Ebola could become as widespread as HIV/AIDS, while pharmaceutical companies partnering with federal agencies are scrambling to fast-track experimental Ebola vaccines to market. Here is how a localized Ebola outbreak has been turned into a global public health emergency. In the spring of 2014, the African nations of Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone report a surge in cases of Ebola, a highly contagious viral infection that starts with symptoms of fever, headache, muscle and stomach pain, diarrhea, vomiting, bruising, and in severe cases, progresses to bleeding from the nose, mouth, and in gastrointestinal tract. Between 25 and 90% of Ebola cases end in death, and the current Africa-based outbreak is averaging a 40 to 50% case fatality rate. In June and July, missionary workers in Africa repeatedly contact U.S. health officials, warning that there is urgent need for an immediate response to the spread of Ebola. By August 2nd, an American missionary infected with Ebola in Liberia is flown from Liberia to Atlanta for treatment with an experimental drug, Z-Pap, and shows signs of improvement within 24 hours, eventually fully recovering. 10 days later, the World Health Organization approves use of fast-tracked experimental drugs and vaccines in humans after declaring Ebola an international public health emergency. 8 days later, Liberian security forces violently clash with citizens trying to break out of a government-imposed quarantine that left panicked residents in a poor neighborhood without food or other supplies. On September 2nd, NIH announces upcoming clinical trials using an experimental, genetically engineered, viral vectored vaccine co-developed by NIH and GlaxoSmithKline that will bypass normal FDA licensing regulations for demonstrating safety and effectiveness. 3 days later, a third U.S. missionary doctor working in Liberia is diagnosed with Ebola and flown to Nebraska for treatment as deaths in Africa reached 2,100 people out of about 4,000 thought to have been infected. On September 16, the U.S. announces that Ebola is a national and global security threat, and that at least 3,000 American military personnel will be sent to the capital of Liberia to establish a regional military command and control center. 2 days later, the United Nations Security Council adopts a U.S.-developed resolution calling for a lifting of travel and border restrictions on citizens living in African nations where Ebola is widespread, so that everyone can travel freely between countries, including into the U.S. On September 20, a Liberian citizen infected with Ebola flies from Liberia to Texas and exposes family members after a Dallas hospital misdiagnoses his symptoms on September 26 and sends him home. When he is diagnosed with Ebola 2 days later, public health officials fail to immediately employ appropriate infection control measures, and children and adults in Dallas are put at risk for Ebola infection. 10 days later, CDC officials hold a press conference and insist that the only way a person can transmit Ebola is when there is a fever and other symptoms of illness, and the only way a person can become infected with Ebola is to have direct contact with body fluids of an infected person, but that under no circumstances is Ebola airborne. Americans are assured that there will be no Ebola epidemic in this country because CDC officials are, quote, stopping this in its tracks. On October 2, a Missouri microbiologist and emergency trauma physician checks in at Atlanta's airport wearing a hazmat uniform with protective goggles, boots, and gloves, and a sign on his back declaring that, quote, the CDC is lying. To protest non-existent infection control measures at airports and what he called a sugarcoating of the risk of transmission of Ebola, predicting the deadly infectious disease will consume every African nation and become epidemic in America. On October 8, top disease control and Ebola infection experts publicly admit that scientists are not sure how Ebola is transmitted, and that there is a possibility it could be transmitted through the air when an infected person coughs or sneezes, and that an asymptomatic person without a fever may be able to infect others. The scientists also expressed concern that Ebola screening at airports targeting people with fevers could be ineffective because symptoms can be masked by taking Tylenol and other fever-reducing medications. The next day, the House Armed Services Committee and Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense approves nearly $1 billion in funding for the U.S. to lead the international response to the Ebola outbreak. That same day, the first NIH-developed experimental Ebola vaccine started being tested on humans in several African nations, while a U.S. public opinion poll reveals that the majority of Americans want a ban on incoming flights from Liberia and other countries where Ebola is rampant. By a 2-to-1 margin, Americans oppose sending American soldiers to those countries, while 50% of Americans suspect there will be an Ebola outbreak in the U.S. So here is what inquiring minds want to know. Why did U.S. health officials in Atlanta and on the ground in Africa ignore the exploding Ebola outbreak last spring? Why did U.S. government officials fly American aid workers infected with Ebola to the U.S. rather than treating them with experimental drugs at hospitals in Africa? Why did the U.S. government press the United Nations to adopt a resolution calling for no restrictions on international travel from Liberia and other Ebola-stricken countries? Why did the Centers for Disease Control, supposedly the world's leading infection control agency, fail to immediately assist Texas health officials when the first case of Ebola was diagnosed on U.S. soil, to guarantee that, at a minimum, the kind of infection control measures used in most skilled nursing homes in America would be carried out? Why has the director of the CDC repeatedly stated that the only way a person can transmit Ebola is if they have a fever, and that people cannot get Ebola unless they have direct contact with the body fluids of an infected person, but that under no circumstances is Ebola airborne, when he knows, or should know, those statements could be false? And why are experimental Ebola vaccines being fast-tracked into human trials and promoted as the final solution, rather than ramping up testing and production of the experimental ZPAP drug that has already saved the lives of several Ebola-infected Americans? A logical conclusion is that some people in industry, government, and the World Health Organization did not want the Ebola outbreak to be confined to several nations in Africa, because that would fail to create a lucrative global market for mandated use of fast-tracked Ebola vaccines by every one of the 7 billion human beings living on this planet. Will there be an Ebola outbreak in America? Ask the CDC, WHO, DOD, NIH, and Congress. Learn more about Ebola and Ebola vaccines on NBIC.org. It's your health, your family, your choice.
There was somebody posted a video, or not a video, but an article on one of the Facebook groups that I'm on that said, and luckily this was satire before you guys freak out, but said that the new vaccine that they're going to be distributing by December has an RFID chip in it, and so they're going to use it to implant RFID chips into you. But that's not true. It is satire. Okay, so one of the big questions that I had too was why all of a sudden they're fast tracking these vaccines. Well, where did these vaccines come from, and why are they ready to fast track them in the first place? That's a good question as well. So while money is poured into vaccine development and fast-tracked by the FDA and the WHO, the biodrug created using tobacco plants is not widely available due to lack of safety and efficacy trials. When asked whether ZMapp should also be fast-tracked and given to patients outside the U.S., President Barack Obama stated, "I think we have to let the science guide us." Okay? So, in other words, this drug, and you can look into it more, but apparently it's made by using tobacco plants. So it's a biofarm product. It's biologically a pharmaceutical. It's kind of a mix of natural with drug research. So interesting to look into how they make this. It says right here, 2014 experimental drug ZMapp saves 2 Ebola patients of how many? 9. Okay, so it saved more than have died, by the way. Treatment is a cocktail of 3 Ebola-specific antibodies made in tobacco plants and pioneered by Arizona State University. So, interesting. You guys should look into that. All right, so I want to go now into kind of like the bigger deal behind this, because I hope you see there's a lot more hype than there is facts here. Okay, a lot more hype. It should not be getting the kind of mass media attention that it does. I want to point you to a scenario that should have had that kind of national media attention. And that was the flu of 1918. Okay, this was labeled in history as one of the most devastating outbreaks in the history of the world, with deaths estimated between 20 and 40 million people, including 675,000 in the U.S. Now, if you look at that honestly for a second, 675,000 out of 40 million, is not a terrible statistic. I mean, when you look at a global, based on populations and everything, we actually, I would say, fared better than most other areas. But that is a tremendous number of people, 675,000 people. We haven't approached anywhere near that because we've only so far had 9 cases, 1 death. This actually was 675,000 deaths. Okay, that's a big difference, right? So, in Davenport, Iowa, if you guys don't know where Davenport, Iowa is, I don't either. No, it's where chiropractic was essentially birthed. That's where D.D. Palmer, his first office was, and B.J. Palmer took over and built the first chiropractic school in Davenport, Iowa. So this was a big chiropractic center. 50 medical doctors cared for 4,953 cases and had 274 deaths. Okay, these are just statistics. That's a 5.5% death rate. 150 chiropractors in the same city at the university probably saw 1,635 cases with only 1 death. Okay, which was a 0.0006% death rate. There was a big difference in those numbers. Okay. Next one, for the whole state, MDs treated 93,590 cases with 6,116 deaths at a 6.5% death rate, or 1 out of every 15 patients. Okay, whilst 4,735 cases were seen by persecuted chiropractors who were not licensed and basically were run as second-class citizens. And they lost 6 patients out of that group. That was a 0.001%, or 1 out of every 789 cases that they treated ended up dying. Okay, national figures showed that 1,142 chiropractors that were tracked cared for 46,394 cases with a total loss of only 54 patients. In New York City alone, 950 of 10,000 cases died using medical methods, while it was reported that only 25 of 10,000 cases died using drugless methods. 25 compared to 950. Okay, I don't know what that natural methods was. It was just drugless methods. They didn't use drugs. 233 cases were treated by MDs and pronounced lost. This was the big one. This was the big one, because what happened from there is when they were pronounced that they were lost, they got taken over by the ones that were basically the backup plan. Have you guys ever heard of the cases like that? You know, patients, they go the medical route for a while, it doesn't work, so where do they end up as a last resort? The chiropractor, right? It's the last resort, when it should be the first resort. And so of those 233 lost cases, chiropractors took over and recovered all but 25. So you can imagine now, during the same epidemic, there were 6,400 deaths out of only 10,000 patients with a complicated pneumonia under medical methods, but with drugless methods, only 100 of 10,000 of 10,000 died. Okay, big difference when you go the drugless routes. So what happened as a result of this? You can see it from the quote here. The fabulous success of chiropractic in combating the 1917-1918 influenza outbreak was a public relations breakthrough. Okay. Dedicated chiropractors came into the profession in increasing numbers, and they had a sure sense of certainty, heady conviction, and a great willingness to fight for the cause. So what happened is they saw, because of these statistics being tracked, by the way, by the U.S. government, they were aware of this too, and shortly after that, they just started giving chiropractors licensure in all states, and that's where a lot of the licensure standards came from because of the success during this period. But there was a lot of hype around chiropractic during that time because they saw the obvious differences. And so chiropractic grew and blossomed where before it was just constantly getting stomped under the medical boot. So why do I go through this? Okay, I hope you guys see the big picture why I go through this. Because, you know, this was something that killed 675,000 people. Yet you see what happened when people were doing drugless, natural, immune-building therapies to combat sickness, they got well. Okay? And it brings us to the big point of really the entire thing. Okay? Is this just another bug? You know, yes. At the end of the day, it is. It is just another bug, and it's because of this big principle. This right here shows you this is optimal health through death continuum. So at this end of the scale, you see optimal health, then you've got dysfunction, then you've got injury, then you've got disease, disintegration, and then death. It's funny because looking at that, I explain this to new patients all the time. I'm like, basically, you know, if you imagine normal function is up here, you know, the first thing that you do is you lose function. Okay, in other words, you have compression in a nerve, something like that, you have subluxation. Okay, well that's like down here. You know, just subluxation, that's easy to deal with because all you have to do is make adjustments and you're right back to normal function. But if it's been there for a long time, it gets to the point where it's deteriorated, and now it's degeneration. Okay, that's the next phase down. So that's now injury. Okay, and if that injury is left there for a period of time, now it begins to affect what? Organs. And so now you have organ malfunction, which we call disease. Okay, and then somewhere down the road, that problem continues to multiply until eventually what happens? Death. Okay. I explain this to people all the time, you know, and here it is right here. So down here you also see in terms of exercise, you know, and just, you know, kind of looking at healthy people, you got the elite athletic type, the super, the normal, the subnormal, the impairment, and then disability. But this is the important thing here. You see that below injuries where the signs and the symptoms are, okay? There's a poster, I don't know if I even have that anymore. The skull and crossbones thing. I don't think we have that anymore. But I used to have it up in my old office. Some of you guys might remember it if you've been around long enough. But there was a skull and crossbones on the wall that in the back that said symptoms are not a sign of something like symptoms are not a sign of oncoming disease. It means you're already diseased. Like you don't get symptoms until you're already into disease. So we look at symptoms like, oh no, I'm getting, right? That's not the way it works. If you have symptoms, you already got it. Okay? And so signs and symptoms are down here past injury. If you're seeing the signs and the symptoms, the problem's already gone. But here's the important part right here I want you to see. Okay? What we're forgetting about this whole Ebola thing is that you have a factor in play. See, B.J. Palmer, I've quoted this to people, I don't know, dozens of times in the last couple of weeks, that if the germ theory of disease were true, there'd be, anybody can finish it?
No one living would believe it.
Bingo. Nobody alive to believe it. If the germ theory of disease were true, there'd be nobody alive to believe it. Think about that. The germ theory tells you that bacterial and viral infection is what causes disease. Okay, so germs cause disease. But see, that assumes that you have no resistance. Okay? What has to happen is you have to have a decrease in resistance sufficient enough for the incoming assault to have an effect. Does that make sense? Think about it like a castle. You know, if you've got no defense on the walls and you got the gate down, you're not going to be hard to take. But the human body has guards all over the gate. It has the gates closed and sealed and everything else. And as long as you have that internal resistance, you can attack all day long because guess what? That's the point in a castle. That's why you don't just live in a tent. Okay? So what is the important thing here? It's not the distress coming into the system and knowing everything there is to know about Ebola. What's the important factor here? Internal resistance. You build your internal resistance, and then the same thing that happened in 1918 would repeat itself. You would see that healthy people do fine. When you do healthy methods, you do fine. If you burden the body with drugs and chemicals and antibiotics and everything else, you're not going to be fine because you're shutting down the body's natural protective mechanisms. Does that make sense? Okay? So, suggested and established aids for maintaining a strong immune system and overcoming viral infection. And I want to say this because, let me pre-frame this. There's so much hype about the Ebola thing that what I think bothers me about it is that the natural crowd goes on it just like the medical crowd. I mean, apparently nobody's looking at the statistics because right now it just doesn't justify it. Okay? You got the natural crowd that's like, you know, you do this, and this is the cure for that, and this is the cure for that, and we've got the, you know, the cure is this. Have they tested it? I mean, have they actually used those things on Ebola, on a real Ebola patient? I know I haven't. You know, so I'm certainly not going to stick my neck out and say, oh, you know, don't worry about it, the cure for it is silver. You know, the cure for it is this, the cure for it, I don't know until we've tested it. So what am I going to focus on? Building internal resistance so that you have a fighting chance no matter what gets thrown at you. I don't care what kind of punch you throw because if you're trained, you can throw any punch you want, right? It's internal resistance is the key. But it goes so far as to people actually creating formulas for Ebola, like selling formulas of essential oils and all kinds of stuff like that, and creating formulas and selling it. And I'm sorry, but you know, we got to be real careful about what we're selling for something that we've never tested. You know, especially when we have, I mean, if we have no background, no track record behind it, I would not feel comfortable selling something that I've never treated. You know? And so we just got to be careful about that and watch out for that kind of stuff because the bigger the hype gets, the more that kind of stuff is going to happen. It reminds me of the movie, what was the one movie? There was a viral outbreak movie that...
Outbreak.
No, Outbreak was actually, you know, that was based on Ebola.
Yes.
Yeah. But no, there was the other one, and Jude Law was in it, and he was the nutty natural guy that was telling everybody that forsythia was the cure. and in the movie, he made all kinds of money and everything, and he ends up dying at the end of the movie, but he's like this charlatan because he gets found out that he didn't really know that it cured it, and he was promoting it and selling it like out the wazoo, and everybody around him died, including himself. You know, and it's like forsythia, you know, that's a cure. And it's like, that's exactly what we're seeing, you know, with this too. It's you know, that kind of stuff is going to happen if it does become an issue, or it could just die next week like the swine flu did. So chiropractic adjustments, of course, build internal resistance. Viragon and garlic. Why do you use those? Because they're widespread antivirals. They're used against all kinds of viruses. They build up viral immunity. Do I know they're specific to Ebola? No. It's used against viruses, cold, flu, everything else. So it might work. Silver. We know that silver causes viral DNA to bind into clones, so it renders it ineffective, like taking a key and bending it in half. It can't replicate now because it's been rendered ineffective. Vitamin D with vitamin K, if you know that the symptoms are consistent with vitamin K depletion, take vitamin K. There's not going to be any negative effects from it. If you know you're bleeding, probably a good idea to take some vitamin K. Vitamin C. We know vitamin C is a potent antiviral, and it's used for all kinds of immune system compromised problems. So that would be a good one to take. Proper nutrition, physical fitness, detoxification, stress and fear management, which is probably the biggest of all. Sanitation, which is why doctors, that answers the question why they flew him back to the United States, because you saw the pictures of what those hospitals look like over there. No wonder people are getting sick. Okay, and then like I said, beware drug-based treatments, especially those already listed and untested vaccines, and then beware untested, unproven natural tinctures, potions, lotions, etc. Even the natural crowd is on the media bandwagon, like I said. Everything at this point is all based on hype and fear. It's not substantiated by the statistics. Now I may change that, and say something different 6 months from now. If there are thousands of people in the United States that have died, a different story. Now we can start talking about that. But when freaking out the entire population in order to sell a vaccine that they're trying to fast track is just wrong. And that's really what it comes down to. At the end of the day, you can see through this entire thing, it's being used to fast track the next big blockbuster vaccine. And how that's going to play into it beyond that, I don't know yet. But I can tell you this, I'm not getting the vaccine. So we'll just leave it at that. And I hope you guys won't. And I do have a couple others. You guys might want to poke your head up here and read through some of these. These are some of the memes. I couldn't put, some of them were completely inappropriate, so I couldn't put them up here. But some of them are funny. Anyhow, besides that, have a good night. And if you guys need to pick up anything, you can pick it up from the front.